The silence that enveloped the set was not the silence of an ordinary film shoot. It was rather the kind of silence that precedes something sacred or something the soul cannot fully comprehend. In the hills of Matera, Italy, an icy wind swept through the cobblestone streets of that ancient town, and amid the dust and shadows, Mel Gibson gazed at the horizon with a mixture of faith and fear. He had gone months without sleeping well. Ever since that project began, his life had become a chain of impossible coincidences. He didn't call them coincidences, he called them purpose. And that purpose had a name: the Passion of the Christ. Years had passed since the Braveheart actor hit rock bottom. Alcohol scandals, guilt, they had brought him to a point where he no longer recognized his own reflection. But one night, while holding an open Bible with a shattered heart, something inside him broke and at the same time ignited. It was not a vision or a voice, it was a certainty. He had to tell the story of the sacrifice, not with filters or metaphors, but with the rawness of a love that bleeds. He wasn't seeking success or applause, he was seeking redemption. That word, as heavy as the cross his protagonist would carry, became the driving force of his life. When he decided the film would be shot in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin, the studio executives called him crazy. They told him the audience would never want to read subtitles, that the pain had to be softened, that no one would finance such madness. But Gibson knew the story could not be negotiated. "If I give in, I stop telling the truth," he kept saying. So he mortgaged his properties, sold assets, and put everything he had on the line, $45 million out of his own pocket. If the project failed, he would lose everything. But if it succeeded, he might gain something far greater: forgiveness. The casting was another battle. He didn't want stars, didn't want faces that would distract from the message. He wanted someone willing to suffer. That's when he heard about a reserved actor, a Catholic, with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of silence, Jim Caviezel. When they met, the conversation stretched on for hours. They didn't talk about fame or contracts, but about faith, sacrifice, fear. "If you take this role, you may never work in Hollywood again," Gibson warned him. There was a long silence. Then Jim replied, "Everyone has their cross. I'll carry mine." That day marked the beginning of a spiritual alliance that would change both their lives. Filming began in 2003 amid unusually changeable weather. In Matera, where the sun usually shone calmly, black clouds began forming whenever scenes of suffering were shot. The crew dismissed it as mere coincidence, until something happened that no one would ever forget. During the filming of the Sermon on the Mount, Jim climbed the hill with his heart pounding. The cameras were ready, but in a matter of seconds, the wind picked up, the sky turned leaden, and a bolt of lightning struck him. It passed through him from head to toe. The thunder was deafening. The lights went out. For a moment, everyone thought he was dead, but when the smoke cleared, Jim was still standing. Mel, frozen, watched his lead actor remain motionless, eyes wide open, hair sparking. And just as his assistant ran toward him, a second bolt struck the exact same spot. 2 strikes in less than a minute. Neither made sense. Neither left a mark. Only the smell of ozone and a silence that chilled the blood. From that day on, the set changed. There wasn't a soul who didn't pray before starting each scene. Atheists borrowed rosaries, technicians crossed themselves, and even those who didn't believe started looking at the sky before turning on the cameras. The atmosphere became mystical, heavy, as if something invisible walked among them. Gibson didn't speak of miracles, but he knew they were filming something that transcended cinema. Every shot was a prayer, every wound a symbol, and yet the suffering had only just begun. When the flogging scene arrived, everyone knew it would be the hardest part of the shoot. Mel insisted on absolute realism. Roman whips, chains, sweat. To protect Jim, they placed a board behind his back. But in the heat of the scene, one lash went astray. The whip dug into his real flesh. The scream heard in the film was not acting. It was pure pain. The entire set froze. Caviezel collapsed. His back was bleeding. "Don't cut," Mel murmured, voice breaking. "Don't cut." And that moment was captured forever, not as spectacle but as testimony. The following days were a real ordeal. The actor kept shooting with the open wound, with fever, and later with a dislocated shoulder when the 70-kilo cross fell on him during the Way of the Cross. Some of the blood was fake, but some was mine. he later said. The doctors insisted on stopping production, but he refused. Christ didn't come down from the cross, neither will I. From that point on, the line between fiction and faith vanished. What had been performance became sacrifice, and everyone knew it. The cold intensified as they moved into the crucifixion scenes. The nights were so freezing that the actor's breath froze. Jim hung on the cross for hours, shivering. His body began slipping into hypothermia. His lips turned purple, his breathing grew weak, but he refused to stop. "I feel like it's not me suffering," he whispered. "It's him." The words echoed in Gibson's soul. The director understood that the film had become a filmed mass. They were no longer shooting a story. They were participating in it. The crew started talking about things logic couldn't explain. Lights appearing where there were no spotlights, shadows moving on their own, gusts of wind that seemed to answer prayers. Some swore they saw figures dressed in white among the cameras, watching, guiding, then vanishing without a trace. When they reviewed the set photos, those figures appeared in none of them. "Maybe angels make movies too," one cameraman joked, but his voice trembled. No one laughed. The days grew more intense. Some crew members began changing without realizing it. There were those who wept without knowing why, others who asked to confess in the middle of work. Those who had come for money stayed for faith, and when Luca Lionello, the actor playing Judas, asked to speak with Gibson, he did so in tears. "I can't go on being the same person," he said. "I want to be baptized." Days later he was. The same happened with Pietro Sarubi, who played Barabbas. He said that during one scene when he locked eyes with Caviezel, he felt Jesus forgiving him. From that moment, his life changed completely. In the midst of that supernatural atmosphere, a piece of news leaked in secret. Maya Morgenstern, the actress playing Mary, was pregnant. No one knew, but when Gibson found out, he understood the symbolism. Mary, carrying life amid pain, was a living metaphor for the mystery of redemption. Her last name, Morgenstern, meant Morning Star, one of the ancient titles of the Virgin. Nothing was coincidence. Not the names, not the lightning, not the silences. Everything seemed woven by an invisible hand. As filming neared its end, exhaustion mingled with a strange sensation, as if the boundary between heaven and earth was fading each day. The dusty streets of Matera seemed frozen in another time. The actors were no longer acting. They were living inside a story that was transforming them. And as the crew dismantled lights and prepared the final scenes, a certainty ran through everyone. Something greater than themselves had manifested there. Mel Gibson felt it every morning. He walked alone among the prop crosses and silently repeated a prayer he had learned as a child. "Lord, let all this be for your glory, not mine." The day of the crucifixion was the longest of all. The sky dawned overcast, the air icy. The makeup team had spent hours preparing Jim Caviezel, who shivered under a blanket. Dried blood makeup, open wounds, crown of thorns. The scene was supposed to last only minutes, but it stretched on for hours. Caviezel was tied to the real wooden cross, raised between rocks and wind. The cameras rolled, and an absolute silence fell over the set. The birds stopped singing, the generators shut down due to an inexplicable failure, and no one dared speak. Only the wind could be heard whipping the hill. Gibson gave no directions. He knew what they were witnessing was not cinema, it was something else. The following hours were a test of faith. Jim began trembling, fever rising, skin growing pale. At one point he fainted while hanging, and everyone ran to lower him, but he insisted on continuing. "Just a little longer," he murmured. The medics checked him and said he was on the verge of hypothermia. Still, he went back up. The wind intensified, and a fine rain began to fall. Gibson yelled, "Action!" and Caviezel's face was suddenly illuminated by a shaft of natural light that pierced the clouds. No spotlight was aimed that way. The cameras captured the exact moment his body shook. His lips moved, his eyes looked heavenward. It was as if he were praying for all of them. When Mel said, "Cut," no one moved. Some wept openly. Others knelt without knowing why. In the days that followed, rumors multiplied. Some claimed to have seen a shining figure beside the cross, a white silhouette that vanished when the take ended. Others said they heard a voice whispering in the winds. But what impressed most was the atmosphere of reverence that took hold of the crew. Swearing disappeared. Technicians secretly lit candles. Actors walked in silence at the end of each day. Even the skeptics spoke of something that cannot be explained. Rosalinda Celentano, the actress who embodied Satan, also had her own unsettling experience. To prepare for the role, she had spent weeks in isolation, barely eating, trying to strip away every human trace from her gaze. But during filming, something overwhelmed her. The scene where she walks among the soldiers holding a baby with an aged face was shot under grey, cold light. When the take ended, Rosalinda couldn't stop crying. She said that during those minutes she felt a dark, tangible presence, as if evil itself were watching. Gibson hugged her without a word. They both knew something had been unleashed in that moment. Filming ended with the resurrection scene. It was early. Dawn painted the ancient stones gold. The tomb cave had been built by hand, and the air was filled with an indescribable calm. Jim, exhausted but serene, lay inside. Mel gave the order. Light. A glow entered through a natural opening, bathing the actor's face. When he opened his eyes, everyone held their breath. It was the first time in weeks they had seen him smile. The take lasted only seconds, but no one forgot the feeling. It was as if the darkness that had dominated the previous months dissolved. Some said they felt a sudden warmth, others a deep peace. When Gibson shouted "Final cut," tears flowed uncontrollably. It was not the end of a film, it was the end of a pilgrimage. Back in Los Angeles, Mel Gibson knew he had filmed something unrepeatable, but the price would be high. Hollywood did not understand what had happened in those hills. They accused him of fanaticism, anti-Semitism, madness. The major studios refused to distribute the film. No studio wanted his name on the credits. Still, Gibson did not stop. He distributed the film himself, organizing screenings in churches, parishes, schools. What began as a rumor became a spiritual revolution. Within days, lines to get into theaters stretched endlessly. People arrived with rosaries in silence, as if in procession. No one spoke when leaving. Some cried, others prayed. The theaters turned into makeshift temples. What was meant to be just a movie became a phenomenon of faith. And the impossible happened. The Passion of the Christ grossed over $600 million worldwide. It became the highest-grossing non-English language film in modern history. In Brazil, Mexico, Poland, churches organized caravans to see it. In the United States, priests celebrated Mass before each screening. In the Philippines, people left the theaters on their knees. The media tried to explain it as a cultural phenomenon, but for believers it was something more. It was a spiritual manifestation that had pierced the screens. But success also brought darkness. Gibson was attacked by the press with unprecedented ferocity. They called him a fanatic, extremist, misogynist, dangerous. The same man who had risked everything to tell Christ's story was pushed into the abyss. His reputation was destroyed, his name erased from the studios. In interviews, he appeared broken, eyes lost. After the Passion, he once said, "I felt like all hell came down on me." The man who had sought redemption was crucified by the very industry that had once glorified him. Meanwhile, Jim Caviezel lived his own exile. He went from being a Hollywood promise to a forgotten actor. Major directors stopped calling. Roles vanished. But he never regretted it. "If I had to do it again, I would without hesitation," he said at a conference. Instead of hiding, he began traveling, giving talks on faith and sacrifice. He adopted 3 disabled children, visited prisons and hospitals. He dedicated his life to serving, convinced that the role had not been acting, but a mission. Years passed, and the wound became a seed. Gibson, after a decade of silence, looked again at the script he had kept stored away. He didn't want to repeat the story. He wanted to complete it. The resurrection, not the end, but the beginning. In secret, he wrote with his brother Donald and screenwriter Randall Wallace. They didn't want to show just the miracle, but the mystery. What happened between the cross and the dawn, between death and glory. "I want to show the moment Christ breaks down the gates of hell," Gibson said. "I want the viewer to feel what it meant to free the souls from Hades." It would not be a sequel, but a revelation. The project began to take shape. Gibson returned to Matera. He walked the same streets, the same hills where years earlier the sky had opened. He assured that the new film would not seek to show blood, but light. That the Passion had spoken of suffering, but the resurrection would speak of power. "We already showed how much Christ loved us. Now we will show how far that love went." He announced 2 release dates, The first on Good Friday 2027, the second 40 days later on Ascension Day. Nothing was coincidence. 40 days, like the ones Jesus spent among men before returning to the Father. Jim Caviezel would not return to play the Messiah. This time Gibson was looking for a new face. Every generation needs to see Christ with new eyes, he explained. Still, Caviezel publicly blessed the project and said his role had been an unrepeatable honor. The new cast would include Jaco Unen, Mariella Garriga, Pierluigi Pacino, and Riccardo Scamarcio. The budget exceeded $100 million, but what intrigued the public most was not the money but the content. Gibson spoke of mystical visions inspired by the Book of Revelation and the Messianic Psalms. The film would show Christ's descent into Hades, his confrontation with darkness, and his victory over death. There would be no fictional heroes or empty effects, only the story of the one who conquered the impossible. When Mel Gibson was asked if so much sacrifice was worth it, he answered calmly, "Yes, because I saw hearts change." For him, The Passion was not a movie. It was a prayer recorded on celluloid. And now with the resurrection of Christ, he seeks to close the circle that began in those hills of Matera. Not with blood, but with light. Not with pain, but with power. Because if the Passion showed how much Christ loved us, the resurrection will show how far that love can descend and how high it can lift us.